I'm wrong about everything because I apply my worldview and my values. Like, you gotta get out of the office. And when you do, you notice the silliest little things, or things that you think people would want. You realise that's not what they want at all. Like, their worldview is different to mine, and they don't want to do it that way. They want to do it the complete opposite way to how I would want to do it. So, yeah, getting the answers to those questions quickly, and yeah, just a weekly process of, usually on a Monday morning, what are the biggest risks? What are the things I'm worried about? What are the things that are keeping me awake at night about this project this week? And by the time it gets to 5 o'clock on Friday, what would success look like in terms of when we get to the end of the week? What do we want to know?
Right. Okay.
How are we gonna find that out?
Yeah. So
what are we gonna do to make that happen? I don't have a Gantt chart. I don't know what we're gonna do, or how long it's gonna take, or what. Like, it might change by the time I produce the Gantt chart. I might have learned that's not what we should be doing, and we should be doing something else altogether. So I mess up the executive summary. My projects are always reporting read, because we've got big risks that we're working our way through systematically, empirically testing to find out the answers. And if I'm running my innovation project correctly, I think it should start reporting red, and then over time I'm slowly turning it green as we get a better idea of what it is we should be doing. And at any point of time, my highest risk on my project reporting is always, we still don't know this is a thing. This may not be a thing. We don't have the evidence yet, sufficient evidence, that what we're doing is a real thing. And at any point in time, if we discover, actually, you know what, we shouldn't be doing this. We've come this far. We thought this was a thing. We've learned that it isn't. So let's shut it down instead of carrying on executing the Gantt chart and doing the thing that we planned that we've learned that's wrong. So yeah, life's way too short to build stuff no one wants.
Yeah.
I think that's the secret sauce, the missing link.
Well, today we're joined by Matt Scott. Matt is a futures thinker and an innovator. He's worked across Agritech, Internet of Things, and energy. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Vaughan.
Thanks for making time.
Sure thing. It's good to be here.
Perhaps you could just share a little bit of your background amongst all that.
Sure. I trained as an audio engineer and music producer, so I always spent 18 years working in and around recording studios before I started the Masters of Business Administration at University of Canterbury, where I met you, and realised probably slightly a little bit before you that that's not what I wanted to do anymore. I wasn't in alignment with my calling. Someone asked me on the MBA, what do you want to do? And I didn't know how to answer that question. I was like, what are the options? So I've been on a bit of a journey, took a leap of faith into the great unknown, been sort of following my nose, following the adventure. I ended up working on a big software digital transformation project. I've ended up working on a startup. I did my own little startup for a bit. Then I ended up working for an Internet of Things product development consultancy, working with lots of other startups who were my customers to help them work through the process of doing what they were doing. And yeah, my current role, I just changed jobs actually. The last 2 years I've been innovation lead at a big old state-owned enterprise. So across the whole business, all throughout New Zealand, 1,800 people, looking at how to innovate in ways they've always done things. But yeah, I was working on lots of different projects in that role, and one of them was quite exciting and managed to turn that into a full-time role. And now I've stepped into that role, so I'm just focused on delivering one project at the moment.
Nice, okay. And just talking a little bit about futures thinking. So how does, well, firstly, what is futures thinking? And also how do you sort of bring that into your work? Like, how does it play out? How does it benefit you in your work? Yeah,
so I think futures thinking is another tool in my toolbox. There's lots of tools. You can use more than one tool for accomplishing the same job, I guess. And futures thinking is one that I kind of discovered kind of by accident, almost, really. So I guess the main idea behind futures thinking is it's futures, plural. I guess it acknowledges from this point of time moving forward into the future, there are many different possible futures that could eventuate from this moment. That's why it's plural. So a lot of traditional business forecasting tried to predict one future. Futures thinking acknowledges that instead of trying to predict one, it's better to explore many different ones. And then I guess through exploring different possible futures, you can identify your preferred future, what works out best for you. You can probably identify a future that you don't want, so something that you want to actively make sure doesn't happen. And then you can take actions today to help make sure you get the future scenario that is your preference, and you avoid the future scenario that you don't want. So instead of just waking up one day and being in the future, I guess it's about being part of that future as it evolves, and taking actions today to make sure you get the future you want.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So now just thinking in your work across some of these large organisations, how are you going about working out in that kind of system? How are you going about working out what is the right problem to be actually solving?
Yeah, good question. I guess I talked before about having a toolbox with a lot of different tools. I came away from the MBA feeling like everyone was looking for the 5 bullet point steps. Just do these 5 things and get the results. And my experience since finishing the MBA has been every job you do is different and might require a different combination of different tools. So hanging your picture on the wall, you could tell someone, okay, well, you need a hammer and a nail and a measuring tape, and here's how I can show you how to do it here, and write down the 5 steps. But then when you go to do your next job, it's not going to be exactly the same. You might need a drill bit or a ladder, or you may need to clear a large group of people out of the way and put up some safety cones before you can even start getting your tools out of the toolbox. So I've found there to be many tools in the toolbox depending on the job to be done, and I guess working out which tools to use and in which contexts and what works and what doesn't work is part of solving the right problem. There's no cookie cutter that works the same way in every situation. Yeah, design thinking is definitely one of the formative tools that I'm using in the way that I'm approaching what I'm doing. So it's quite a different way of solving problems than the organisation I'm working in now is used to. So I guess it's quite typical for people to want to solve a problem by jumping straight to a solution. And I don't know, maybe in some cases that's okay. But I think when the solution is unknown, it's important to spend more time up front making sure you're understanding the right problem to solve. And then, testing and learning as quickly as possible, I guess, is my kind of key difference in the way that I'm approaching what I'm doing. So rather than spending too long coming up with the perfect plan, which is going to be wrong anyway, instead of spending time planning, just start and learn. And what are the riskiest things we don't know, and deliberately designing experiments to test those risky things we don't know and find out the answers to the unknowns as quickly and as safely as possible. So a lot of times it's about creating an environment where it's safe to experiment and it's safe to test and learn. So it's setting up sort of a place where you can try stuff out without breaking anything too catastrophic, but learn the answers to those questions as quickly as possible, because I don't know, my experience has been, well, whatever you think in your head is going to work, when you go out and try it, there's something you haven't thought of, and finding out what those things is as quickly as possible and for as little investment as possible with minimum risk is kind of how I've been going about doing what I'm doing.
Okay. I mean, look, you've there's a lot in there, and some things I've sort of picked up I'd like to maybe just talk about is, so you've mentioned the risk, the testing and learning is sort of, well, testing those assumptions, right? What is the biggest risk? And then you've mentioned a lot around that, what I've taken as sort of the context. So how do you, in that environment, and we're talking about large sort of governmental organisations here, so I'm assuming that there is quite a significant difference perhaps to a startup, that sort of thing. So how do you actually go about with the different cultures, the different context, actually starting to enable and get some I suppose, some movement on that type of approach, whereas potentially they're used to more linear approaches or plans. And that
you're right, it's definitely not a linear approach. And I think even when you learn some of the design thinking tools, there's lots of different tools that are all variations of the same thing. I think you're a fan of the duck tree model, discovering, understanding, creating, testing, resourcing and implementing. And I think even the way that's presented could be misinterpreted to be the 6 bullet point steps that you do this, you do this, you do this, and then bang, there you go, you've made it to the end and you're finished. I would reiterate your point that it's not a linear process, and sometimes you got to start at the end before you can do your discovery. You need to do your resourcing, or sometimes you'll do your discovering and your understanding, and then when you're creating and testing, you learn that you actually need to go back to the start again and do it again. Or while you're carrying on with your resourcing, you might be in parallel doing more discovery, or they're not discrete steps, they do overlap, and I think each case requires a different approach for how they're used. But you're right, I've worked in small startups where you have a lot of autonomy to get on with stuff and do stuff and make mistakes, do the wrong thing. Learn by getting it wrong. Get it wrong 4 times to work out the 5th time what the right thing is that you should have done the first time. But along with that, probably less resources and smaller startups, or maybe not less, but can sometimes be harder to access resources. Whereas I think the larger organisations have the resourcing available, but there's definitely a bigger element of stakeholder engagement to get your stakeholders comfortable with what you're doing, give them the level of comfort they need to be able to work in this different way. So I'm definitely finding in this current role, building the solution's easy. That's the easy part of the project. Like, technically, building the thing's a piece of cake, but bringing the different stakeholder groups on that journey and opening up the space to be able to innovate is requiring a lot of work. And the futures thinking piece that I talked about before has been working really well as part of that mix of tools.
Yeah. So if the actual building the thing is the least difficult part of the process, can you speak to some actual practical ways, or how have you actually gone about building this stakeholder engagement and creating that environment?
Yeah, so I think each stakeholder group has a different set of needs. So starting off by mapping who the stakeholder groups are, and then I used a 2x2 matrix, and the 2 axes are labelled impact that the stakeholder can have on the project and their level of interest. And then you get 4 quadrants, whether you collaborate with the stakeholder group, keep them informed, or whatever the other one is that I can't think of. So I use that framework, whatever it is, can't think of it off the top of my head, to identify who the stakeholder groups were and how I was going to interact with them and what the key messaging needed to be. And then, I don't know, I learned I had a period of time, 7 or 8 years, where I was teaching tertiary students at universities and polytechs. I remember when I first started teaching, I'd get up the front of the class and just stand at the whiteboard and write stuff on the whiteboard and assume that everyone was learning, and sort of learned the hard way that that's not how people learn stuff. The way people learn stuff is by doing it and trying it. And I sort of evolved my teaching practice through, I guess, failing lots of times and working out what works. So instead of me bowling in and telling them, okay, here's what we're doing, stand back and we're going to do it to you, using this futures thinking approach has worked really well for saying, okay, so here we are now, we're in the present. What are some things we know are happening now that might have an impact on us in the future? Let's list what they are. Okay, let's explore some of those. Let's imagine we're, 25, 30 years in the future. It's the year, let's say 2050. And let's say this thing has happened and this thing has happened. So let's explore what does that mean? What does that look like? What are the impacts on us in the future? And then what are the impacts of the impacts? Like if this happened, then would that have the impact of pushing real estate prices up in rural towns, or starting to understand what some of these things would mean? And then from that point, articulating, well, if this was to happen, what would our preferred future be? What would we want the outcome to be for us? And then I'll have different groups of tables all exploring different things, and they feed back, and usually there's a consensus across different scenarios, people exploring different signals that are happening now that might affect the future. When you boil it back down to, okay, so what are the things we need to be doing now to make sure we get the future we want? There's some commonalities across all the different scenarios that you can then come up with a concise list of, okay, well, so what you've told us is we need to be doing this, we need to be doing that, we need to find out the answer to this question, and we need to be doing this. So that gives me a mandate from my stakeholders to go away and do those things and find out the answers to those questions. And the question I usually ask at the end of those workshops is, okay, so next time we get together, the next workshop, what update do you want to hear back? What progress do you want us to have made? And they tell me. They tell me, well, next time we want you to have done this and this and this, and I just go away and do it. So really, that is a big part of driving the direction of the project, and what the project does is driven by stakeholder engagement.
Okay. That key word in there, that around mandates, right? So you've created a great picture of how you've been able to sort of engage with key influencers across the organisation, getting them involved, and actually it's their vision that they've created, right?
Well, across the organisation's one stakeholder group. I'm also dealing with government departments, regulators, international bodies, unions, quite a complex mix of stakeholders, but yes.
Okay.
Same principle applies.
Same principle. Okay, so within the organisation, diverse stakeholders within the organisation, you've been able to sort of have them involved, create their vision, or they have created their vision, and then you've now got that mandate that you set. So a couple of things there within the mandate, is that what has helped to unlock the resources, but also how important has having a significant champion or stakeholder actually open the doors and let you get on with things?
So the first part of your question was about unlocking resources, and I think ultimately to be able to unlock resources it's the same in startups really. People want to have some comfort that the investment required is going to have some kind of payoff, right? Mm-hmm. And they want to know, usually, right at the start, what's the size of the opportunity, what's the revenue opportunity here, how much is it going to cost, and then when does it return on investment, which are very valid questions to ask before you invest in anything. However, before you've started doing any of this work, you don't know the answers to any of these questions when something hasn't been done before, and to be able to find out the answers to those questions takes work and people to do the work and resourcing, capital expenditure to make that happen. So it's kind of a chicken and egg situation that can be difficult to navigate, where people need some level of comfort, enough comfort to invest in the next stage, to find out the next riskiest things, and some kind of, I guess, guide of where you're heading in terms of potential revenue, potential opportunity. So yeah, articulating that, I do that just by working in tiny little stages, like breaking the project right down to, well, let's just find out if we can just do this simple thing. Like the first thing we need to know is, can we put this piece of tech in the place we want to put it, and will it work? Let's just find that out. And I find when you go into a stakeholder meeting where you're asking for resourcing and you're waving your hands in the air saying, imagine, we're going to do this imaginary thing, and I don't know how long it's going to take or how much it's going to cost. There's a lot more power in being able to say, hey, we tried this little thing. There it is over there. It's not some imaginary thing. That's it. And hey, look, it worked. Or actually, it didn't work. It didn't work the first two times, but then we worked out that we need to do this and this, and now we worked out how to do it. It's a lot more compelling, easier for people to buy into the resourcing, I think, when you can show them something real, make a small bit of progress, create something and test it. Helps with that. The second part of your question was about key champions who endorse the project across the different stakeholder groups, and they're influential to each other, right? And you get buy-in from one, it creates buy-in from others. But I still feel to be able to do that requires being able to demonstrate little bits of progress.
Okay.
I think you can do a workshop, you can do your discovering, you can explore the problems to solve, identify the problem to solve, but at the end of the workshop, then what? What happens after the workshop? Okay, so we ran that workshop, everyone went back to their day jobs, and what happened? So getting enough resourcing to be able to implement, deliver something, show some progress, kind of helps that cycle of the non-linear progress. But I think if you're not able to do something and demonstrate some progress, eventually over time you erode that trust in the process. People stop coming to your workshops because they went to the last one and nothing ever happened. So yeah, I think do something. Doesn't just start. Anything. It doesn't have to be the final thing. Like cobble something together out of rubber bands and paper clips that gets the ball rolling, and as a start, and then you can iterate and improve and add and test the next riskiest assumption. But yeah, starting's the hardest part.
Right. Okay. I just wonder on the flip side of the coin, have you experienced, or you sort of have this in the back of your mind in any way, that I'm imagining that getting small wins and starting to bring more and more people on that journey, and yes, might be making progress. Sometimes the experiments might not work, all that, but eventually one will, and okay, you've learnt something, you're moving forward, all of that, and everybody's getting behind there. Do you think there's a bit of a risk of everybody becoming the kind of the sunk cost scenario, and where we just keep putting more and more resources in, and we're not getting where we'd hoped or envisaged? So
absolutely, there's that balance and that tension, and I guess the way I'm executing my innovation projects doesn't align with everyone else on the executive summary with their red, amber, green status report. When you're executing a known plan, generally you start off, you got your Gantt chart of what you're going to do, and you report green, 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 and then over time maybe you start reporting amber and possibly red on a couple of things. And then there's my project where I don't know anything. I don't have a Gantt chart. I don't know what we're going to do, or how long it's going to take, or what it might change. By the time I produce the Gantt chart, I might have learned that's not what we should be doing, and we should be doing something else altogether. So I mess up the executive summary. My projects are always reporting red, 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 because we've got big risks that we're working our way through systematically, empirically testing to find out the answers. And if I'm running my innovation project correctly, I think it should start reporting red, and then over time I'm slowly turning it green as we get a better idea of what it is we should be doing. And at any point of time, my highest risk on my project reporting is always we still don't know this is a thing. This may not be a thing. We don't have the evidence yet, sufficient evidence that what we're doing is a real thing. And at any point in time, if we discover, actually, you know what, we shouldn't be doing this. We've come this far. We thought this was a thing. We've learned that it isn't. So let's shut it down instead of carrying on executing the Gantt chart and doing the thing that we planned that we've learned that's wrong. So yeah, life's way too short to build stuff no one wants.
Yeah, interesting. So like with that kind of thinking, and well, I suppose reality that we might be making progress, but we might not reach the ultimate sort of aim of this.
And what a success to celebrate.
Yeah.
So we didn't go ahead and build the wrong thing.
There we go. So look, with that whole culture, are you having these conversations at a senior level that people can see what you're trying to do in your process, and they will still be supporting and are open to, if you like, failure?
I think conceptually people understand the concept that that's how it works. But I still think, I don't know, differing organisations probably have different levels of comfort around doing this type of stuff. And the organisation that I'm working for is fairly early on in using this way of working, and to its credit, it's amazingly open-minded and supportive. But I think there's still a natural tendency when it comes down to it, you can talk the talk, you can say we celebrate failure, you can understand the concept, but actually, when you've spent some money doing something and it didn't work, and you've learned, hey, as long as you don't go too far down the wrong rabbit hole, right? Like, do a little experiment to test what you need to know with the minimal expenditure of time and resource, and find out the answer as quickly as possible. Like, it's a bit of a special thing to actually truly celebrate the fact that, hey, we thought this was a thing, we spent some money looking at it, and you know what, we've learned it's not a thing, so we're not going to do it, and that's a success. And we move in the process, we found this other thing that we think might be a thing, and let's move on with that instead. And I think if you're doing this right, I don't think you should ever end up doing what you thought at the start. If you get to the end of your Gantt chart and you've executed the plan exactly the way that you thought it was going to be when you started, that would indicate to me that you haven't been open to learning anything along the way. There must have been some things you could have learned and changed. And I think if you're doing this right, you should end up doing something different than what you set out to do. That's part of the journey, is just starting and learning and finding out. Like, you're not going to find that out unless you start.
Yeah, and I think, part of that reality is, well, what's the alternative, right? If we're not exploring and trying.
And my stakeholder groups have done that exercise and explored, well, what does the future look like if we don't do this? And they've poked around in some different future scenarios of what happens if we don't do this, and come back and given me a mandate to be going and doing this stuff, because if we don't do it, someone else is going to do it. And wouldn't it be better if, like, we're in the prime position to be leading this? Let's go. Our time is now.
Fantastic. I do sort of want to just stay in the experimenting side of things for a little bit longer, Matt, and I'd love for you to share, whether it's your current role or anything previous on your kind of innovation sort of journey. Can you speak to us around a particular scenario or case story where, you were running some experiments and you learnt certain things, and you eventually either sort of pursued or pivoted the idea or whatever. So how did it help you, and can you give us some sort of practical examples of what you did?
Absolutely. So getting it wrong is a good way to learn. Making it safe to do that, I guess, was the lesson I learned the hard way. I'd first started working for the Internet of Things product development consultancy, and it was a widget, it was a little handheld device, and the development team at the office had made version 1 of the product, I guess, the minimum viable product for me to take to the customer. So I took it to the customer and went in and sat down to have the meeting, and I put the widget in the customer's hands, and he went to turn it on, and it didn't turn on. It was a piece of electronics, and I could have just crawled under the chair, and I was like, I'm going to kill those developers when I go back to the office. They've given me a thing that doesn't work. But the customer said, oh, no, this is no good at all. And I was like, look, I'm really sorry. It was working when I left it. And he cut me off. He says, it's the wrong size. And I was like, and he's like, yeah, and you want something, big and chunky that you can actually wrap both hands around. Like, this is too small. I was like, okay. I think I just got away with the fact that it doesn't turn on and work. All right, let me go and pick up something bigger. So on the way back to the office, I picked up a larger, just a prototyping enclosure from your favourite electronic supply store. Took it back to the office and said to the guys, first of all, it didn't work. Second of all, it didn't actually need to work. We'd done all this development effort on this little thing, and we need to be making a bigger thing. So can we just mount the little thing in the big thing, and I'll take it back to him. So I took the bigger thing back and gave it to him, and he's like, yeah, this is great. And he tipped it over sideways. And I was like, you're holding it landscape. We thought you'd hold it portrait. He's like, no, it's landscape. It needs to be like this. So then, it needs to, when you flip it over, if you're left-handed, the screen needs to flip upside down. And I got so much learning about what our product needed to be that we could have done without building anything. But we'd already gone ahead and built this thing that turns out didn't work when I went to try and demonstrate it. But all I really needed was to put some boxes in the guy's hand. I could have learned So that was kind of the eye-opening moment for me, that you don't need to build the thing to find out whether you should build the thing. Like, stop building stuff that's wrong. Find out what's wrong about it without wasting effort. Yeah.
So how do you now, with that lesson, like what's your sort of general approach you try and take?
I try and over time and learning, having these critical breakthrough moments. Now I'm trying to optimize how do I get that learning faster and with less expense, and how can I surface and bring out these flush out these key learnings as quickly as possible, is kind of how I'm approaching stuff. There's a product called Surf Locker. So if you've been out to Sumner Beach, you might have seen there's a vending machine where you can rent a surfboard and a wetsuit.
Right.
So the idea behind it was, it's like Lime scooters for surfboards. You can grab a surfboard and a wetsuit and go for a surf. So the guy who came up with that concept, he originally had a really good plan of what the final product was going to look like, and sort of brought it into our Internet of Things consultancy to say, well, how much is it going to cost to build the thing? But I guess we took the approach of breaking that project right down into tiny steps to test key assumptions, and I think he did a spectacular job of getting those learnings quickly without building the thing. So the first version of his product, he just put some of his old surfboards in an old van and just parked it down by the beach with a sign on the window saying, want to hire a surfboard, text me. And a few people started, I think a lot of tourists and backpackers and stuff passing by, didn't have a surfboard, wanted to go for a surf, were texting him, he'd go down and give him a surfboard. So then the next stage of that was, okay, well, he put just a padlock from the hardware store with a combination on it. And when people text him, he would text them back the bank account number, say, well, transfer your money, and then I'll text you the code to the padlock, and they'd just let themselves in. So before we went ahead and built the thing that's there now, which is a fully automated vending machine with locks that automatically pop open and an online payment, app and everything, he was able to test those key risky assumptions, hypotheses, very inexpensively and and it helped inform how to build the actual thing, what we learned along the way.
And what's, since that time, like, what's it like now? Is that scaled? And
yeah, I haven't been out and caught up with them for a while. Usually when I'm walking along the beach, I sometimes spot them and have a bit of a yarn and a catch up. I think last time I talked to them, there were half a dozen or so of them around Banks Peninsula and Canterbury. So, yeah, they're all fully automated. I think the next problem he was trying to solve was how to sterilise the wetsuits, so he didn't have to physically go and pick up the wetsuits to sterilise them for reuse. But yeah, solving one problem at a time. And he had money coming in the door for his product from day one. He was paying the kid next door to go down early in the morning and change the combination on the hardware store padlocks while we were working out how to automate that wirelessly.
So you mentioned, these riskiest assumptions. How are you kind of, as a general rule, how are you looking at this? Are you in some way mapping them? Or because you mentioned before that, building the thing was the easiest thing. So is that often the case? And how are you looking at, I suppose, customers versus, the technical side of things versus the financial side of things? Like, where do you decide what to be working on?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, it's a constant process of, although I did say building the thing is the easiest part of the project, working out what to build is probably the hardest part of the project, probably. So we're spoilt for choice in the product I'm working on at the moment. There's so many different options for things we could do. And every time we show a new potential customer what we're doing, they give us another 4 different ideas we haven't thought of where we could go and what we could do. So the hardest part at the moment is dialing in, how do we prioritise the different things we could do, and which thing do we do next? And what's the highest priority, biggest bang for our buck, most valuable beachhead thing that we should do first? And then we can add more later. So I guess the key to that process is the way we're tackling it is in short cycles. So in design thinking, They use design sprints, and in our delivery we're using sprints as well, so just a short cycle. I'm using 1 week sprints at the moment, where each week I'm reassessing what are the biggest risks to the project, what do we need to do, what's the work to do to de-risk that project. So I use a tool, the test card by Strategizer, for succinctly summarising what is the test we need to do to get the answer we need to prioritise this work and get the answer to this risky assumption. And I guess, just following that process, so just constantly in a phase of discovery, understanding when someone brings up a new product idea. I'm interviewing 10 customers a week at the moment, getting that empathy, customer discovery to really understand their world and their problems to solve, their pain points, their jobs to be done, to make sure we're nailing how we solve that problem. The solution we're offering is going to work. Lots of short sort of creating something and testing it. And when I say something, like, we'll create and test a 5-frame comic strip showing someone using the thing. We're not building the thing. We're saying, hey, you told us last time we talked to you that it'd be good to solve this problem. Take a look at this. Here's a little comic strip of someone. They've got this problem. Here they are. Look, they're using this thing to solve a problem. What do you think of that? Get some feedback and test the idea before building the thing. You don't have to build the thing to get that learning and that feedback. And so much value in, I'm wrong about everything because I apply my worldview and my values. Like, you gotta get out of the office. And when you do, you notice the silliest little things, or things that you think people would want. You realise that's not what they want at all. Like, their worldview is different to mine, and they don't want to do it that way. They want to do it the complete opposite way to how I would want to do it. So, getting the answers to those questions quickly, and just a weekly process of, usually on a Monday morning, what are the biggest risks? What are the things I'm worried about? What are the things that are keeping me awake at night about this project this week? And by the time it gets to 5 o'clock on Friday, what would success look like in terms of when we get to the end of the week? What do we want to know?
Right. Okay.
How are we gonna find that out?
Yeah. So
what are we going to do to make that happen?
You're continually kind of, as I think you were saying before, running sprints. So you're kind of like sprinting within your whole design work, as opposed to maybe running a design sprint to actually design something. You're going little short accelerated pieces of work.
That's the way I'm doing it. It's just tiny steps. And I guess a lot of people would say that a week's not long enough to really get your teeth into something and do something properly. But I think the stage of the projects I work on are usually pretty early stage, and I'm trying to invest a minimal amount to get the maximum learning. And once we get a better idea of what it is we're building and what we need to build, maybe the sprints can get longer and we can get into some chunkier, meatier development. But at the moment, that process is working well. You've talked a bit about customer discovery and sort of picked up on there, getting things into customers' hands, and I'm guessing that there's some questioning. You mentioned the comic strip, so some early kind of tangible sort of feedback. Journey maps we use a lot. Journey maps, okay, great. Mapping the current process as it stands as a tool for a conversation, just showing someone, hey, look, here's how this is what we think of the current process. How does this look to you? And they say, well, that's not how we do it here. We do this and this. And if you can iterate your journey map to a point where you can show it to someone and they're like, this person really knows what they're on about. They know this, like, that works in anywhere you take it. That's kind of the goal I'm trying to get towards. But then after getting some talking, it's just a useful tool to talk around. Like, okay, so we're at this point here, what if, what are the pain points, and what if we could do this? And from that, putting together a future state journey map as a tool we use a lot, talking to customers. And I think you've hit on something really important there, that, even though, I have preferences around certain tools, and I think they're super valuable to help progress things, it's really only that in terms of like that facilitation, right? It's about having the conversation so that you can explore what is actually going on this thing. Yeah, if you can do that while you're walking in their shoes, there'll be some, like, anytime I travel somewhere, it seems like a big effort and a lot of expense to travel somewhere, but anytime I do, I always catch some little insight or glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye that I wasn't expecting, that I didn't know that's what I was going for, that has a fundamental impact on the direction that we're taking, that always makes the trip worthwhile.
Right. So
there's gold out there. You've got to get out there and walk the walk to pick up on that stuff.
Yeah. Mate, I'd like to sort of talk a little bit about the sort of other end of things. And while you've mentioned that you have been predominantly early stage kind of ideas, and you can be, again, talking about something else from another organisation you were working with or whatever, or your sort of current one. But in some of these projects that looking like they are going to go to market or be implemented in an organisation, my view is that often that's where things will fall down, right? Because in the consulting land, when they're brought in to perhaps do help innovate, when we get to a certain, let's say, a product is designed, there you go, right? And so there's this whole behaviour change kind of piece, particularly if we're talking about, implementing in change in an organisation, a new thing into an organisation. So has your mind been sort of thinking about that with this current project you're on or other projects, and how did you go about this, or any intentions with existing projects?
Yeah, there is an overlap between innovation and delivery. They are part of the same thing, but my current hypothesis, to prove wrong, I think they're separate muscles. And I think doing innovation well, ideating, and doing delivery well are two separate things. That I've seen organisations that are good at the ideating, but not so good at delivering something at the end of it, and other organisations that have good delivery processes, but they're not necessarily discovering and understanding the right problems to solve with what they're delivering. And it must be quite rare, or maybe I just haven't. Like, I've only been doing this a short time and only in Christchurch. I haven't worked all around the world at maybe there are amazing places that do both really well, but it feels like, while there is an overlap, it's difficult to do both well. And I don't know, ideas are easy, really. Like, I could list all of the things that I thought of first before they were actual things, but then I didn't do anything about it. Like, execution is everything. Execution is hard. And
what's hard about it?
I think it's in that overlap. It's in doing the right thing, building the right thing, solving the right problem in the right way. So it's in getting that overlap, handover. Shouldn't be a handover from one to the other. So I know there's a lot of different frameworks and tools, different things that people like. I'm a big fan of, lots of things. I like lean value stream mapping to find where the value is. I like bits of agile and scrum, and I don't know, like I've said already, I don't think you can take a cookie cutter out of the toolbox and apply it to any situation. I think there's a mixture of different tools that work for different situations, but I think Scrum does a good job of managing the overlap between ideation and delivery, in that it has a role called the product owner or product manager at some organisations, which specifically feeds from customer needs into delivery teams and works in sprints and seems to do the best job of anything I've come across so far in terms of delivering the right thing on time to budget.
Picking up on a word there that you just had was the situation. So how important do you think that, if we're tying, I suppose, the two bookends together, I mean, you've mentioned how important that customer discovery piece is, and learning from your customers about what really we should be building. How important do you think their overall context and the world that they live in actually impacts the tangible implementing of an innovation?
I think that's the secret sauce, the missing link. So I've found recently, so I mentioned at the start, I worked for 18 years in recording studios. I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't know what else I could do. And when I was applying for other jobs, I applied for 87 other jobs after I decided I didn't want to be an audio engineer anymore. And I was kind of leaving my career in recording studios off my CV. So I felt it was a detractor. People were looking at me and saying, well, he's just a music guy. What does he know about business? So I was leaving that off, but it's been quite recently that I've found a way to pull through that 18 years of experience of being in a room with a cross-functional group of different people and facilitating that collaborative, creative thinking process and getting people together to try out ideas and see what works and try different tools and see which ones work and which ones don't work. And in this job I have now, it's the exact same thing. It's just getting people together and facilitating that creative process and trying out ideas and seeing which ones work and which ones don't. And yeah, I think that probably, if I'm generalising across the board, is the missing link in terms of people try and use their 5 bullet point formula or the cookie cutter they used in their last gig that worked well there and try to make it work in the new situation. Like, I think working out what works and what doesn't work and adapting the tool set for the situation is critical for bridging that gap between the ideating and the delivering.
One last question, do you have any particular or one piece of advice that is top of mind for somebody who's looking to try and innovate inside an organisation?
Yeah, my key things that are top of mind, you don't have to build the thing to find out whether you should build the thing. Build something. Just start. And you should be embarrassed by the first thing that you put in the hands of your customer. Don't put too much effort into it. Do a comic strip, or like I said before, it could be rubber bands and paper clips, or I don't know, some way of finding out some piece of feedback quickly. Just start, do something. It doesn't have to be the perfect thing. It shouldn't be the perfect thing, and you'll learn a lot.
Great piece of advice. Matt, thank you very much for taking the time.
Sure.
How would somebody perhaps get hold of you? Would that be through LinkedIn if they wanted to reach out?
Yeah, that's the easiest way to find me and track me down.
Fantastic. Matt, again, thanks very much. Really appreciate you taking the time.